Welcome to Generation Flex, where we bring generationally diverse perspectives to burning challenges. I'm Andy Zopp, sitting in tonight for my friend Melissa Donaldson. The Crown Act, which stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair, is a law that prohibits race-based hair discrimination. More specifically, the denial of employment and educational opportunities because of hair texture or protective hairstyles, including braids, locks, twists, or Bantu knots. But a law doesn't account for implicit and explicit biases on the part of employers as it relates to what's deemed acceptable or professional as it relates to their hair. Nor does it allow for purple hair with red sparkles. And even if it did, is purple hair with red sparkles really acceptable anywhere? Tonight, it's all about the hair story, what is and isn't appropriate in the workplace. Joining me for what promises to be a lively conversation tonight is our Generation Boomer, Phyllis Ross, who's Executive Assistant at Cleveland Avenue. Generation X, Kevin Davis, Senior Director of Marketing and Brand Strategy at the Erie Family Health Center. Generation Millennial, Melanie Stylis, Executive Director, Chicago State Foundation. And for Generation Z, Yasna Harvey, who is a college student at UNLV. For Black women especially, our hair is our crowning glory. But should it be styled in the shape of an actual crown at work? Let's put the law aside for a minute and just ask the question, is there such a thing as doing too much when it comes to hair in the workplace? Phyllis, what do you think?
You can do too much with the color and the styling of the hair. When you're pulling the hair is just pulled out with without combing it. I think it can be too much. The hair that's long and down to the floor, I think that can also be too much in the workplace.
Anybody else? Kevin, how about you?
I agree with what Phyllis said there. I think also, there's some styles that can be a distraction in the workplace. I've seen folks have lots of beads in their hair, walk around. It's a loud distraction in the workplace. But, we were talking a little bit earlier. I look at some of these policies and these discussions. I'm like, is it really that big of a deal? Why are these things such a problem in the workplace? Does it impact the work? Does it get in the way of the work? And if it doesn't, then I feel like it shouldn't be an issue.
Don't you think sometimes, though, isn't it also the difference between whether it's a distraction in the workplace or whether it's just people are uncomfortable with your hairstyle, right? I think there's a differential. I think that's a little bit where the Crown Act comes in. Yeah. I don't know, Melanie, what do you think about are there hairstyles that you think can be a distraction?
Well, I do think it depends on your workplace setting. Like in corporate, it might be a little bit different than, say, nonprofit. But I think as long as it's neat, you should have some freedom within that to wear your hair the way that you want to.
Yasna, how about at school? Do people wear their hair all kinds of ways? And is it distracting?
I don't necessarily think it's distracting because it's not really an environment where I feel like, what their hair looks like will affect the way that I learn. But like Melanie said, it depends on where you are. If if you are in the corporate world, then yeah, that's different. But at school, I don't really think it matters much how you wear your hair. It's just meant to be a place where you're learning.
Should people be able to wear their hair to reflect who they are and not have that impact people's assessment of their competence?
I think they should. I don't think that that's always reality. Yeah. I mean, I think I was raised that you don't want your hair to be a conversation piece. So pick the choices that you want to make in terms of how you wear your hair, but don't take it too far left or right because you don't want to discuss your hairstyle at work.
What if that's part of your style? And, then what do you do?
I guess you just have to own it and what comes along with that. Yeah. Because the reality is that there are going to be some challenges you might face depending on what hairstyle you pick.
Right. And your style may not be acceptable to everybody.
How do you learn and what your style is? And should everybody have to conform to a particular style?
No, I don't think that folks should have to conform to a certain style. And you learn through experimentation, you learn through growth. I won't say maturity, but just you get older and you experiment with different things. But I'm not a big fan of folks assimilating into a particular look and style because, as you said, it doesn't impact their level of competence or their ability to do their job. And it's not on me that you're uncomfortable with my hair. That's a you thing. And, you know, when was the last time you've talked to someone and you thought, oh, they do a great job, but their hair really gets in the way? You just kind of say, that's, you know, that's Kevin's style or that's Melanie's style, and they keep it moving. But, you know, I don't feel like you should have to assimilate and lose who you are. But as you said, you have to accept, I know that I'm doing something different. And not everyone's going to be comfortable with this. So there's that level of understanding that there may be some explanation or there may be some questions. And how do you react to that? And do you give those questions or those perceptions power over you to make you upset or make you want to change?
Anybody else feel like you shouldn't have to conform?
Yeah, I don't think you should have to conform, but I think there is a point where not necessarily assimilating to the environment, but understanding what is expected of you and how, you know, if you're working with, you know, patients, clients, things like that, how, you know, they perceive that profession. I think assimilating, but more so just the type of profession you're going into. That's something you have to consider. That's something I've considered, you know, what are the things I might have to tweak a little bit, even though I don't like it. That's just kind of the reality of things.
Is it dramatically different from, you know, workplaces that require some level of professional dress to require professional hair?
Earlier we were talking about if you work with food, like that might look different than if you have a corporate job. You might be able to wear your hair a little bit longer, or you don't have to wear a net. So there's some flexibility within how you're wearing your hair. So I think it just depends. I don't think there's one straight answer to that.
And I think the challenge now is, what is professional hair and by whose standard? You know, for years that's been centered in whiteness. And so straight hair is acceptable. Anything else, you know, maybe some curls is okay, but anything beyond that, it's unacceptable. It's not seen as professional. And as time goes on, and thankfully we're examining these policies, we're asking those questions like, why, who determined what is professional? And as long as it's appropriate for the type of work that you're doing, you know, considering safety or the industry, if there's like a certain look that you're going into, you know that, but the average everyday person shouldn't have to worry about what's going on with their hair when they go into a workplace if it's considered professional enough, as long as they're presenting themselves in a way that's respectable, you know, and proper for the company or the organization. They're saying the right things that represent the organization the right way, and it's not a distraction. But even that has a fine line of distraction to who, and who defines what that looks like. It's so gray.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. What's professional to me might not be professional to you. I have a different idea of what professional hair looks like.
The other layer to that is even more recently, men's hair, facial hair, that wasn't professional in the workplace. If you look at like my dad's 72, all of his pictures in his early working career, just a mustache, that was acceptable. Black men with a beard, they were seen as more aggressive. It wasn't professional for the workplace. And so that eventually changed over time. So, you know, you're perceived as the angry black man, or you're seen like a rebel. And so it's crazy that that's become normal. I couldn't imagine going to work with a bare face. I just couldn't do it. But it's crazy how that's changed and the perceptions shifted. That's just how you come to work. Why can't that be the same for, you know, for black women's hair?
Perceptions do change, right?
Yeah.
So we become more accepting of some hairstyles, and that is professional. But isn't there a line? I mean, Phyllis, I think that's where you're going. So isn't there a place with hair where you go, that's just gonna undercut your competence or undercut your performance? It's not professional. What do you think?
I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about choosing your battles. You know, I think there's hairstyles where is it really worth, you know, it being a conversation piece at work or it being distracting from what you do. I don't know if I could think of an example. I don't want to pick a color, but maybe some colors of hair, or changing your look too frequently where people are always commenting on your hair over your work product. I think that there's lines in that way, but I don't want to make an affirmative statement about what exact hairstyle is too far at the same time.
Right.
Even, I think recently, Michelle Obama just talked about this. She talked about her time in the White House and how she didn't feel comfortable wearing braids or natural styles because she didn't want, she said they weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
But she didn't want that pushback, the argument. Her husband got in trouble for wearing a tan suit. That was the biggest scandal of his, you know, of his time. But she said herself, like, the first lady in the highest office, in the country, doesn't feel comfortable being herself. That kind of goes into what you were saying about your own perception and confidence. If I'm not my authentic self and I'm not showing up as myself, that's going to impact my confidence in how I feel at work. So what is that middle ground for folks that we have to figure that piece out?
On the other hand, she decided that she needed to make a compromise because she had a role to play and a perspective, and to be able to do her job well, she decided, I have to sacrifice this part of who I am. And I think that's the challenge. The truth is, as Black people in the workplace, we've had to make adjustments all the time in order to be successful. And so if hair is one of them, is that really, it's not fair or right, but is it not something we have to deal with in the short run?
I think it is about picking and choosing your battles. And if you start with natural hair, letting people see that you can do this job just as well with your natural hair. But I think the issue with my generation specifically is how far we try to push it and how quickly we try to push it. There's, like Michelle Obama said, you have to be able to know when someone is ready or when that thing might be not quite for that time. So I feel like right now what we're focusing on is allowing Black people to go into the workplace, they wear their natural hair, and people don't view them any differently. We can address other things down the line, but this is the main point. But people kind of, at my age, get caught up in just, let's change, everything now. It's a slow uphill battle.
That makes perfect sense. There also are those things, have you ever had somebody in the workplace where they've just been like too, right? Just a little too much, and where you felt like maybe I should just tell them that it's too much, right? It's just not, it's undercutting them, and it's going to cause issues. Anybody ever done that?
No, and I wouldn't do it because the people who wear the generation that wears the color in their hair is like the Generation Z pretty much. And I feel that if you say something to them, then they'll become disrespectful and say, I don't care what you think, I don't care what anybody thinks. So I would just step away from that and just let them hang themselves.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point. It's on them. You want to wear it, you have to deal with it. Well, we're going to be right back with this conversation after this.
Hello, I'm Christina Steed, host of For the Culture. Join me each week as we delve into engaging conversations with dynamic guests to get their unique perspectives on culture and life. We'll cover a spectrum of issues and narratives distinctive to the Chicagoland area. Smart, unique, and dope conversations with a decidedly Chicago flavor. For the Culture airs Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on CanTV 19 and streaming on cantv.org.
Welcome back to Generation Flex. While the passing of the Crown Act is absolutely an important step in the right direction, to be sure, I can't help but wonder if any law can fully protect you and your right hair expression in the workplace in America. And that's why, Phyllis, I want to go back to something you said, which was, I wouldn't say anything to them. But what if you knew that it was undercutting somebody who had other potential, and maybe didn't realize that what was going on with their hair or their style or their color was really going to hurt them in the workplace? You still wouldn't say anything?
I don't think so, because in my experience with Generation Z is they don't want you to say anything to them. I'm going to do what I want to do, and you can't tell me what to do. And I think they would think that it was a form of harassment and may even report you. So I don't think that I would say anything to them, even though I felt like it would cost them their job or something like that. I wouldn't say it. I just think that generation, and from my experience, they don't want you to say anything to them.
Right. What if it's an older person, though? Is it just the generation, the younger people, or you think everybody gets offended when you get in their space?
I think that people get offended when you get in their space because they feel like, this is my style. I can wear my hair the way I want to wear my hair. without you having to judge me or say anything about it. I don't think that I would say anything. It's not my place to say anything at all, unless I was a friend of that person, close to that person, and then I would probably say something.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Would you talk to a colleague or a friend and say,
Yeah, I was thinking it would be more based on relationship than generational. I don't know that all Gen Z would have that reaction necessarily, or millennials for that matter, but I think you just have to have the right relationship in the working environment that we have. I think the one thing about younger generations wanting to be more bold about that, to me, that tells me where workforce is going and that's not going to change. And so what I'm willing to accept, they may not be willing to, and that, you know, could become more of a reality and something that people become more comfortable with. I just don't know when. So it may not be a bad thing that that's their approach.
And I think I would definitely say something, you know, as long as we have a good rapport. But I think those of us who are in leadership or have some sort of either decision-making authority, some sort of influence, should be taking that back and saying, before I go talk to this person, does this really make sense? Is this something that is valid? And maybe this is something I need to have another conversation with our HR or someone else to say, I received that feedback, and before I talk to this person, I'm really thinking about this. I don't think that this really makes sense. Maybe we should evaluate our policies or what we look for in determining who's eligible for a promotion, how they present themselves. I think it's on us also to challenge what we're hearing and not just always push back on what we think someone may say. You know, I've changed my perspectives a lot in my career. I'm like, that didn't make sense 15 years ago, but just went with it. But now it's, you know what, let's talk about this. Once you get to a point where you can have those conversations, I think it's on us to help usher in that change or change perceptions, or maybe even be that sponsor for that person to say, you know what, I know you have an issue. What's her name again?
Yasna.
Yoselyn's here, but I feel like that's not an issue, and we maybe need to look at how we evaluate potential at this organization. And so if people respect me, they may take that. That's a whole other backward domino effect, but
I think it's a great way to have a conversation about it, but I do think there are also times when, as an employer, as a manager, sometimes you're just like, that looks not going to be helpful to us in doing what we have to do here.
Absolutely.
And you know, you going to have to adjust to help us do what we need to do. And sometimes it's just frustrating when people aren't willing, you know, take it as a personal affront because you ask them to understand kind of that broader perspective, even if that broader perspective sometimes isn't fair, right? I think that's part of the problem, right? You know, what do you do when someone says, well, that's not fair? And part of you is like, it's not, but it is, right? You know, just because it's not fair doesn't mean it's not real, and we as a business or an office place have to deal with it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you said that. I had a conversation on the way over here, and I was talking to someone about a former colleague of mine, and I said, in your career, you have to make decisions on if you want to fight culture. You're not going to win. And so you have to figure out, are my principles or the things that mean a lot to me that important? If they are, then it means it's time for me to go somewhere else. And that's perfectly okay. So if my company has this image they want to put out there and I don't align with it, and they tell me that, and I don't want to change or fit into it, that's cool. More power to you all. I'm going somewhere else. So you have to make that decision if you want to fight the culture or accept that the culture is the way it is and you go a different route. And there's no other way around that.
Right. I agree. What do you think about that? Yeah, you think you have to fight? You can fight the culture or not fight the power, or not fight the power.
I think the complicated part in that is that sometimes it does take kind of pushing back on some of those things. A lot of stuff has been the same for so long. You've seen the same sort of profile in certain careers, or I'm sorry, professions for so long, and you do get to a point where you're like, well, you know what? Maybe this does need to shift. Maybe I do need to say something. I want to be here. I want to be in this space, and I should be allowed to be in this space in the capacity that I like. And if I can do the job, if, you know, I'm succeeding, then why can't I wear my hair this way? I think sometimes you do have, it does take you to push back So it's uncomfortable, but some people don't want to leave. Some people like where they are, and they're not going to shift for anyone. It takes that fight sometimes, and a lot of people attribute it to like my generation, but that's not necessarily. I think in every generation there's been something that you had to push back on. It's just highlighted because I think the way in which my generation goes about it. I
think the Crown Act came from people pushing back,
Yeah.
right? It was. It's easier for us to kind of understand it because we're like, hey, come on, braids, you can look very professional in braids or locks or how you do it. You can also look very unprofessional. And so I think, very not pulled together. And I think it because it's perception, it can be very difficult. But young people being able to go to school or walk across a graduation stage with braids, well-kept braids, that pushback ended up in the Crown Act. And so I think you're absolutely right. That makes perfect sense. I think the challenge always becomes when you're on those borders, right? And how do you push those borders? And it goes really back to where we started, which is it disruptive, right? And how you define disruption depends on, it's on, I think you said this earlier, Phyllis, what's professional to me may not be professional to you. So so what is your hairline? What is your personal, like, I would never do that, or not? Well, for you, let's talk about your beard. I was thinking, actually, for you, really, let's talk about the beard, because you were mentioning it, because I've seen people with beards kind of down to here, which personally is distracting to me, right? And I don't think that looks super professional in most workplaces, right? In business workplaces. So how about you? What if they say, you know what, you can have a beard, but you got to really trim that thing back? Or is there, if you really wanted to grow bushy, would you do that?
I think at this point in my career, if someone has a problem with my beard, that's not the place for me. And I have that privilege at that kind of portability in my career at this point. But I've worked places like that before where they're like, you got to cut it off. And I was in college. I didn't have a choice. But my limit is where it is now. And when it gets longer, that means I'm on PTO. And don't plan on being on Zoom.
Out in the woods.
Out in the woods somewhere, being a lumberjack or something. But this is like my kind of limit where I feel is not a distraction in the workplace. But I've definitely seen some distracting ZZ Top type beards in the workplace, or like cartoony, Bruto type beards.
Is there other line for anybody else?
I don't think I'd go outside of the black, brown, blonde family. Like, I'm currently wearing my vacation hair, so this is probably about as much as I'll change my look. But I think the colors are pretty. Like, and there's a lot of braids right now where people get like a pop of purple or a pop of pink, and if I didn't have to go to work on Monday, I'd do it. But braids, they last so long that you have to make a choice about like them being able to fit in every setting that you'll be in.
I agree with Melanie. I don't go past the natural colors. This is gray.
Yeah.
But I'm just embracing the gray. But I have where a beautician made a mistake and my hair was lavender, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to go to work like this, know. And it faded, but it took a couple of days, but I just felt so unprofessional with that color hair.
And it was very pretty, though.
I was just going to say, my guess is it looked beautiful on you.
This week on In the Arena, he's an entrepreneur with a heart of gold, Craig Huffman. Take a look.
Data is very important. Look, we all are using data centers, whether we know it or not. Smartphones, tablets, laptops, or even our TV, right? Storage of data. And so data is everywhere and nowhere. And so we all have an addiction to accessing information at our fingertips.
Short, long, relaxed, natural, extension, or locks. For most of us, hair is an important part of our self-identity and self-expression. But in a country where being black or brown often puts us under the spotlight of judgment, more precisely misjudgment in the workplace, is amping up the wattage with hair that bucks the current workplace culture an act of courage or career sabotage? Ultimately, the choice belongs to each of us to decide what, In a world that is anything but fair and equitable, we're willing to give up in order to present our hair story the way we want to present it. Time will most certainly tell the story, the hair story. I'd like to thank my guests, Phyllis, Kevin, Melanie, and Yasna, and thanks to my pal, Melissa Donaldson, for inviting me to guest host tonight in her stead. Generation Flex is back next week with a new topic and a new opportunity for cross-generation dialogue and understanding. Be well, Chicago. Good night.